Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. For decades now, you've been hearing about the threat that global climate change poses to this country and to the world. Al Gore warned you about all of it in a best-selling book and an award-winning documentary. Bill Nye, the science guy, has done a bunch of internet videos on the subject. Chelsea Clinton often tweets about it passionately. This stuff is serious, okay? How serious? Well, here's the scientific consensus on what will happen if we don't immediately pass some sort of democratic global warming bill. Watch.
This city is headed for a disaster of biblical proportion.
Well, what do you mean, biblical?
What he means is Old Testament, Mr.
Yes.
Mayor. Real wrath of God type stuff.
Exactly.
Fire and brimstone coming down from the skies. Rivers and seas boiling.
40 years of darkness, earthquakes, volcanoes. The dead rising from the grave.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
Sorry, that was from 1984. It's a clip from Ghostbusters. But things have gotten much more dire since then. Human sacrifice, the dead rising from the grave, cats and dogs living together, those were the old predictions. We'd be lucky to get off that easy now. A new generation of Democratic office holders is thinking bigger than that and far more apocalyptically. Move over, Al Gore. These kids are serious. Watch.
We're like, the world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change. And your biggest issue is, your biggest issue is how are we going to pay for it? And like, this is the war. This is our World War II.
Okay, so to recap the terms of this conversation, this is a matter of total war. The world will end if we lose that war. Any consideration of cost is immoral. That's what they're saying. This is not the language of compromise and moderation. It is the language of fundamentalist theology. Just a few years ago, they were telling us we could fight global warming with carbon offsets and slightly higher gas taxes. Now they're demanding that we give up airplanes and walk to work. But you got to give it this. The Green New Deal does make a kind of internal sense. Hysterical predictions require hysterical reactions. Half measures don't cut it when you're fighting a world war for the future of this planet. Maybe that's why Democrats seem all in on this. Every single Democratic senator running for the Democratic nomination right now has endorsed the Green New Deal. Cory Booker, a vegan lawyer who represents Wall Street, describes the fight against carbon as at least as morally significant as the fight against Adolf Hitler. Watch this.
There's a lot of people now that are blowing back on the Green New Deal. They're like, oh, it's impractical. Oh, it's too expensive. Oh, it's all of this. If we used to govern our dreams that way, we would have never gone to the moon. And when the planet has been in peril in the past, who came forward to save Earth from the scourge of Nazi and totalitarian regimes? We came forward.
Who came forward when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor? We did. Okay, we give up. Let's take this seriously for a minute because it is at the very center of our national conversation. Let's concede that global warming imperils the Earth and that we need a mass mobilization of Americans to fight it. Solar-powered landing craft on the beaches of this generation's Normandy. No cost is too high, no sacrifice too extreme. Cory Booker is our Patton. Let's stipulate that's all true and not flagrantly insane. Who exactly is our enemy in this war? Well, carbon, of course. Carbon is poison. Al Gore told us that 25 years ago. And who is the biggest carbon dealer on planet Earth, the El Chapo of CO2? You probably assume it's America because nobody has bothered to update you on this question. But in fact, it's not America. It's not even close to America. It's China. China is now the undisputed kingpin in the carbon trade. China throws more than twice the amount of deadly carbon into the atmosphere than this country does. China is the problem. And that's true even if you're just a regular environmentalist who still believes in the Earth and are skeptical of received climate theology, because China is also the biggest physical polluter in the world. China dumps almost as much non-degradable plastic into the oceans as the rest of the world combined. They have not banned drinking straws in Shanghai. So it's pretty clear. If you're worried about killing polar bears and poisoning fish with mercury, you should be very worried about China because they're the ones who are doing it. But nobody in our ruling class seems to know this or care. You don't see Democratic activists or professional environmentalists camped outside the Chinese embassy in protest. Nobody's demanding sanctions on China till they stop polluting. That screechy moron Ocasio-Cortez isn't telling China to give up coal and oil and natural gas and nuclear power within a decade. No way. The left isn't doing any of that because the left loves the Chinese government. It's their model for governing. Just a few years ago, the California governor, Jerry Brown, flew all the way to the Chinese mainland to praise its fascist government for its environmental leadership. For real. You see what's going on. The Green New Deal is not about the environment, just like gun control is not about school shootings, and speech codes have nothing to do with sensitivity. Nothing is what they say it is. What it's really about is punishment and control. The Green New Deal is a religious document. It punishes America for the sins of its prosperity. The only atonement it offers is turning over full control of the entire U.S. economy to the Democratic Party. That's the indulgence they require. They're using moral blackmail to get it. Of course they are. Theocrats always do. Nate Lerner is executive director of Build the Wave, and he joins us tonight. So, Nate, we're being told that we need to fight World War II on behalf of the environment, but fight it against ourselves, is what they're saying. We have to wage war on our own economy. Why wouldn't we be turning this effort outward toward the world's biggest polluter, China, and forcing them to clean up the globe? Why aren't we doing that?
Yeah, that's a really fair question, but how can we ask China to step up to the plate if we're not doing it ourselves? Ocasio-Cortez, for example, is in no position to demand that of China when our own government refuses to invest the funds and resources that we need to into changing our energy infrastructure. So we need to start leading the way on this. We need to start showing that this is something that can work and create jobs and strengthen the economy, then ask them to join us.
Okay, but I get it. I mean, I've heard that argument's, I mean, that's been the kind of way that the left evades the question for the past 25 years. But the new numbers show... Well, it's not really an answer because China emits double the CO2 more than the United States does. In fact, if you
they're
combine
3 or 4 times the size of us.
Oh, okay, but you're making excuses for them. We're talking about the future of the Earth here. We could be gone in 12 years. This is an existential crisis. I'm taking the rhetoric of the left seriously, but they're not taking their own rhetoric seriously because if they did, they would assign actual blame to the world's actual largest polluter, and that's China. But instead they make excuses like, well, China just needs inspiration from our moral leadership. No, why don't we say to China, this is a war. You're the enemy because you are destroying the protective ozone layer that protects the planet, and we're going to force you to change your ways. Why don't we do that?
All right, there's a lot of things to unpack there. Let's start with the rhetoric. This is not rhetoric that the world will end in 12 years. What Ocasio-Cortez was referencing was the UN Panel on Climate Change's report that came out recently that said if global energy infrastructure does not dramatically change in the next 12 years, it will be too late. So if we don't drastically change the way we produce energy, we're in 12 years from now. Right. Well, no, it's not the same
really,
point.
No, but it's really, the point that you're making is it's really serious. And
it's very serious.
I don't know if that's known or not, actually. But I'm assuming that you're right. And I'm taking your assumption and reaching the logical conclusion, which is if this is really serious, we need to get after the people who are causing it. And it's China. And you made excuses for their behavior by saying that they can't really do anything until we lead the way. And
I didn't say that, no.
Well, you did.
I said we are not in a position to approach them and ask them to join us.
Aren't we citizens of this globe?
We pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement.
The Paris Climate Agreement didn't ask them to reduce their carbon. What? No, it actually allowed them to increase the carbon they emit into the atmosphere.
But that's an example of where the U.S.'s priorities are right now.
That's insane. If you really believe this, then why aren't you telling the biggest polluter in the world to knock it off?
We absolutely should, but first we need to do it here domestically. And also, if you look at China, this is a completely false narrative that they're not investing anything. That they're not investing anything right now in green energy because they are. They are reducing greatly.
I don't know what green energy is. I'm just telling you because it's such a large category, it has no meaning. I want to go to the science. And the science tells us they're emitting more than twice the carbon that we are. And yet you're making excuses for them and saying, well, we need to do it first because why? That's like saying we can't fight an authoritarian regime because we have voter fraud problems. No, they're destroying the earth and you're making excuses for them. And so all the environmental groups are taking their money. And don't you think you should be ashamed for doing that?
we're not taking the Chinese money. First of all,
yes, they are.
First of all, I'm not saying that the Chinese should not step up to the table. Absolutely not.
Step up to the table. They're destroying the earth.
They should absolutely join us in this. Of course, I'm calling on them to do that. Of course, they need to be part of this just as much as we are. But I'm saying that we cannot politically approach them
What do you mean
from a
politically?
geopolitical.
This is
we
not
cannot,
geopolitical. It's
how
moral.
is our government
it's
supposed
moral.
to go
No,
ask
no.
them to join us when we're not even doing this ourselves?
You're telling me that we need to shut down every
We need to put our money where our mouth
plant.
is.
Yeah. Why? It's not about our money. It's about saving the earth. I'm using the rhetoric, which is a moral rhetoric, not an economic rhetoric, a moral rhetoric of every Democratic presidential candidate right now today, and applying it to a foreign country that they like much more than they like the United States, and you're making excuses for that country. I honestly don't understand
I'm
why.
approaching this from a very logical standpoint when saying that
Really?
the U.S. government cannot demand. They should demand, but it's not going to be effective unless we're also
Why
doing
is
it
it not
ourselves.
why
How
is
does
it
that
not
not make
effective?
sense?
I don't
Why
know.
you can't tell
Because
someone to
they're
join you in a
polluting-
fight if you're not fighting that fight yourself.
Really? Okay.
You say, go fight
so
climate
the Chinese
change.
believe
We'll
in fair
do it
play.
too. Don't worry about it.
You're
We need to
missing
show
it.
them we are invested in this.
You're missing it. I don't think you're updated on the numbers. They're polluting twice as much as we are. They're the world's biggest polluter by a factor of 100%. So it's not like we need to
But they're
lead the way.
300,
They
400%
need to
bigger than
lead
us.
the way. Oh, you're making
We both.
excuses
Why
for them
can't? Why
again.
we are America? Why shouldn't we be leading the way in this fight?
Oh,
I'm not
so
making
we have a
excuses
higher
for them.
standard here. I see.
Yeah, of course, we do have a higher standard.
Right.
We're the United States of America.
So we have to wage World War II against ourselves. That's exactly what you're saying.
We should have the Chinese join us, but we cannot fight. We cannot expect them
it's a
to
war
join us in this
against
fight if
ourselves.
we are not doing it ourselves. I don't understand how you're not getting this.
Because it's their crime, and we should hold them accountable for it. Just my view.
We should. You are absolutely right. We should hold them accountable, but we need to hold ourselves accountable too.
We're the guilty ones. Yeah, I get it. Okay, Nate, thank you very much. High-speed rail is central to the Green New Deal, which says that rail would replace cars. Okay, does high-speed rail work? Has it been tried anywhere? How about our biggest state, California, which was trying to build a high-speed rail line between its two biggest cities, San Francisco and LA. And yet yesterday, it canceled that route. Why? Because it didn't work. The cost rose to a staggering $77 billion. Chuck DeVore has watched this up close. He's a former California State Assemblyman and vice president of the National Initiatives of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and he joins us tonight. So, Chuck, what was suddenly a California story is now a national story because light rail is a centerpiece of the Green New Deal. Why didn't it work in California?
Well, it got too expensive. The travel times were way too slow. The ticket prices were about double what you'd pay for Southwest Airlines. And it became very apparent that they promised something that they couldn't deliver. They said they were going to have this project that would have all this private money and investment that wouldn't have to cause taxes to go up. Look, they haven't gotten a penny in private investment. The federal government's put $3.5 billion into it. And now they're in material breach of their agreement with the federal government. I think the federal government should ask for that money back and use it to build the wall.
So I'm just a little bit confused because it sounds like it's not that it didn't work in California. It sounds like it was a flaming disaster. It was a fireball of lies and embarrassment. And so why would you take that and make it the centerpiece of your energy policy?
Well, you had a lot of crony corporatism and big labor involved in selling this to the public. So it narrowly passed in 2008 with Obama at the top of the ticket, got 52.7% of the vote. It was backed by corporations like Siemens, the locomotive manufacturer out of Germany, and big labor. And it's basically been a crony corporate gravy train from day one. Now, the problem is, at the rate they're spending money, they wouldn't finish the route for about 100 years. And as I recall, we're all supposed to be dead by then. Isn't that how it's supposed to work?
Actually, I think it's 12 years. So I guess what you're saying is they're paying off their campaign contributors and calling it environmental policy. I think I've seen that before. Chuck DeVore, I appreciate your coming on and clarifying.
Thank you.
Congressman Ilhan Omar is becoming a standard bearer of the Democratic Party. If you want to know what they think, listen to her. But apparently, and this is interesting, she is immune from criticism. We learned that today. Why is that? Congresswoman Ilhan Omar is picking another fight, this time over sports. In a new letter to USA Powerlifting, Omar attacks the organization because it opposes having a biological male compete against women in a lifting competition. Omar claims, ludicrously, that biological males have no advantage over women. That's in defiance of about 1 million years or so of evidence to the contrary. It doesn't matter, though. Omar's letter is just the latest case of powerful people on the left bullying anyone they can't control. You saw the same thing with the gay marriage debate. Any Christian-owned bakery that doesn't want to bake a gay wedding cake risks fines, lawsuit, and ruin. Okay, so those are the new rules. So what about Muslim-owned bakeries? Do the rules apply there too? Stephen Crowder asked that question a while back, and he found pretty much what you'd expect. Lots of Muslim-owned bakeries will not bake gay wedding cakes, and we're not complaining about that. Private business owners shouldn't be forced to engage in speech they find immoral. But the left doesn't agree. So where's the letter from Congresswoman Omar demanding that Muslim bakeries who won't bake these cakes be shut down? We're still looking for that letter. And what about Omar's own mosque, by the way? Does it perform gay marriages? And if it doesn't, has she complained about that? Has she denounced them? We called her office today to find out. They haven't replied yet. We suspect we'll be waiting a while for an answer, but we're always open to one. Congresswoman Omar is starting a lot of fights recently. For a newcomer, she's in the center of many news stories. Today on Capitol Hill, she berated the new envoy to Venezuela, Elliot Abrams, accusing him of being a liar and attacking him over the Iran-Contra affair that took place more than 30 years ago. Here's part of it.
More than 800 civilians, including children as young as 2 years old, were brutally murdered by U.S.-trained troops. You later said that the U.S. policy in El Salvador was a fabulous achievement. Yes or no, do you think that massacre was a fabulous achievement that happened under our watch?
That is a ridiculous question, and I
Yes or no?
No.
I will,
Sorry, Mr.
I will
Chairman,
take
but
that as a yes.
I am not going to respond to that kind of personal attack.
Congresswoman Omar is herself, of course, a refugee to this country. She was born in Mogadishu. She spent most of her time, at least her political life, attacking this country as immoral. She also supports a number of policy ideas like the Green New Deal that don't make mathematical sense. She's also for abolishing ICE. So there are things you could criticize about the Congresswoman, but you're not allowed to criticize her. A new piece in Politico argued that. Now, why? Well, not because what she says is factually true, but because, of course, of her identity. Quote, the GOP strategy risks a backlash. A party that has problems with women and minorities continues to focus its attacks on women of color, end quote. Not on women it disagrees with, but on women of color. Their color is the most important part to the people at Politico. MSNBC agreed with this, of course. In a segment yesterday, one of its guests said that it was, quote, not a good look for conservatives to attack Congresswoman Omar because she's a woman. Her actual views are irrelevant. It's about her identity. Michelle Malkin is a syndicated columnist and author, and she joins us tonight. Michelle, thanks very much for coming on. I think a lot of things about this, but one of them is that the rest of us are deprived an interesting debate over the issues when that debate is shut down on the basis of immutable characteristics. You know, you're this color, the person you're talking about is that color, no more conversation. We don't even get to hear what the issues are.
Yeah, it is cheating the American public of a true, honest, and vigorous debate on very important policy matters. And I also feel a little bit left out, Tucker, because this immunity shield is only provided to certain privileged women of color who claim a certain ideology. Over the last 25 centuries, I've never had this privilege. Who's handing out the Wonder Woman bracelets that can deflect all bullets of criticism? Because I've never gotten one. And it's that double standard of the attacks that women and people of color who are conservative or limited government or libertarian never enjoy that Ilhan Omar has. And it's not just the left that claims this privilege for these radical, racist, hateful women like Ilhan Omar. Unfortunately, you've got enablers in the Beltway who call them conservatives, like Jennifer Rubin at the Washington Post, carrying water for these people. And you look at the hearing today that you showed a little clip of. What was that? It was coordinated kabuki theater. Code Pink has achieved its dream of having essentially an ideological intern now sitting on the other side of the aisle carrying water for them. Amazing.
What I find so striking, though, is that if you're making the argument that people of one color should be allowed to say one thing, and people of another color can't say that thing because of their color, that's by definition a racist argument. You are a racist if you are making that argument, again, by definition. And yet it's the same people who make that argument who are always denouncing everyone else as racists.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
Well, you know, I've diagnosed this, at least online, as what I call Silicon Valley Sharia. Because the perfect example, of course, is that Ilhan Omar is allowed to tweet these heinous, vile things, while a Jewish woman who was the first to criticize her before she was elected, when people should have been listening, Laura Loomer, is banned from Twitter. This is insanity when you have Louis Farrakhan, I guess a man of color, who's allowed to call Jews termites on Twitter. He's still on Twitter, and Ilhan Omar is still on Twitter, and the brave critics of jihad and this narrowing of what's allowed in public debate are increasingly being deplatformed. And it is because these people on the left smell fear, Tucker Carlson, that they've been able to get away with it.
Well, I totally agree with that. And it's because the cowardice of a lot of people in Washington who should be defending their people and the right to speak honestly in public have run away and caved. I agree with that completely, Michelle Malkin. Thank you for saying that. Michelle Malkin, as always.